Good evening, everyone. This is Vibha Nasheen, and I'm doing a reading from the book Messages from the Masters by Dr. Brian Weiss. I apologize for the last live session got abruptly disconnected, so I had to restart the live session. Welcome back, and we'll continue to study from where we had left yesterday. So let's begin. Eventually, we will understand that all wisdom is within us. And as we remember, practice, and access this wisdom, we will become our own best teacher. At this point, we will find peace and joy in the present time. Because the real issue is about how we live our lives right now, being spiritual now, no matter what we have been taught to believe. And as we awaken, the spirits will sing their love songs directly to our ears. Sitting more or less anonymously in the audience of Maury Povish's show in late August of 1997, I watched the renowned British leader and medium Rosemary L.T. give intimate and specific details to a panel of people who were grief stricken from the tragic loss of their loved ones. Carol and I had been visiting in New York City, and we had stopped to say hello to Johnny Evans, my literary agent, the day before the taping. Johnny is also Rosemary's agent, and she impulsively invited us to sit in the audience for the show. Rosemary did not know we would be there. Like Celia and James Van Praagh, Rosemary, the author of The Eagle and the Rose and Proud Spirit, is exceedingly adept at relaying messages from the other side. In order to use her gifts to better the world, she had founded the Rosemary L.T. Association of Healers, RAH, R-A-A-H, a non-profit organization based in England. Although I have enjoyed her books and had watched her before on television, this was my first chance to watch Rosemary work in person. There are so few psychics and mediums who are really good and accurate in their work that I jumped at this opportunity. Unfortunately, on American television, everything has to be a test. Rosemary was supposed to provide precise details about the dead loved ones of people she was meeting for the first time and about whose lives she knew nothing. All this on television in front of a live studio audience. Talk about pressure, I thought. She should be meeting with them privately and without any of these distractions. Still, Rosemary seemed okay with the arrangements. And I understood that television thrives on capturing people's spontaneous reactions. In my mind, I wished her well despite the obstacles, knowing that this was not a fair scientific evaluation of her abilities. Rosemary overcame all these impediments and with amazing accuracy provided fact that after fact to the grieving families. The comfort, hope, and relief she provided were palpable to all. The entire audience shared in this moving and dramatic experience. Unknown to everyone, I already knew two of the people on the stage with Rosemary. Ralph and Kathy Robinson had attended one of the conferences a year previously, and we had spent considerable time talking about the tragic death of their young son, Ryan, who had been accidentally shot by a friend. Ryan and his friend were at an unsupervised teenage party when they found a Russian handgun. They believed that the gun was not loaded because the safety on this particular gun allowed the trigger to be pulled back and clicked. They had pulled the trigger many times with no bullet ever firing. But somehow the safety accidentally was switched off. There was a lone bullet in the chamber, and on a cold October evening, shortly after his 16th birthday, Ryan died of a gunshot wound to his head. The Robinsons' world fell apart. They were consumed with grief. I knew the details of Ryan's death and many of the details of his short life. Rosemary, not knowing of any of this, turned to them. "Bang!" she said loudly. "He keeps saying bang." She even described the smell surrounding the horrible accident, and she added many more details. Ryan's parents, both of whom are sophisticated people, were visibly moved. I knew the encounter with Rosemary would help them to heal, even beyond what I could do for them. "He's so cheeky," Rosemary added, accurately describing Ryan but temporarily confusing his mother. Cheeky is a term used in Britain to describe healthily impish, mischievous personalities, and Ryan certainly fit the bill. Once explained, his mother heartily nodded her agreement. A few days later, Ralph wrote me a letter. Well, either the production crew was feeding Rosemary information about our loss of Ryan, or she is nothing short of phenomenal. She was so gracious in her relationship with us. She came into the holding room before the show to connect with each of us and tell us how she has worked. After the show, she again spent time with our group to make sure everyone felt complete. All in all, it was a very rewarding experience, and we were both very glad that we had participated. Ryan's death and their experiences afterwards have brought enormous spiritual growth to the Robinsons, who have been developing projects to help Compassionate Friends, a national organization and that provides support to bereaved families. To me, there were no coincidences. The Robinsons have been giving profusely to others, and now Rosemary could give back something to them. And I, a kind of common denominator, could witness the whole process. With his letter, Ralph included a poem written by his son. We didn't know he wrote any poetry until we discovered his journals after he was gone. Follow the wind. Follow the wind call for you. Can you capture the life that has yet to be lived? That stained soul can be cleaned with time and faith. In another letter, Ralph wrote, I have learned how important it is to tell people when you love them, because tomorrow is just a concept in our minds. During that same show, Rosemary made a profound comment about listening. She said that we ask and ask and ask again for messages, for signs, for communication. Yet we rarely take the time to listen. How can we hear if we do not listen? And listening can take time. We need to be patient, and we need to be especially careful to listen for the messages of coincidences. It is a natural and normal human longing to want signs now. to want messages right away. However, listening is a skill, and it takes time to develop such a skill. As you practice being quiet, going within, taking the time to listen, and creating the space to listen, then you will hear. Then you will see the signs and receive the messages. At the same time, you will develop the art of patience. Chapter 14, Reaching Beyond Ourselves. Meditation and visualization will help you stop thinking so much and will help you begin a journey back. Healing will occur. You will begin to use your unused mind. You will see, you will understand, and you will grow wise. Then there will be peace. Our hearts know the path to happiness and inner peace. Spiritual practices such as meditation and prayer reminds us of what we already know. When we forget our heart's message and fall into life's ruts and crevices, we feel unfulfilled and unhappy. We get depressed and anxious. We have blurred our perspective, forgotten the bigger picture, and lost the way. The remedy is simple. Take the time to remember your divinity, your spiritual nature. Remember why you are here. Meditation is one way of triggering your memory. Meditation is the art or technique of quieting the mind so that the endless chatter that normally fills our consciousness is stilled. In the quiet of the silent mind, the meditator begins to become an observer, to reach a level of detachment, and eventually to become aware of a higher state of consciousness. By pulling us out of the rut of our everyday awareness, meditation serves as a reminder of what we have been learning about higher, more spiritual values. To meditate regularly is to remember regularly. You are reminded of the bigger picture, of what is important to us in our lives and what is not. It takes practice and discipline to rid the mind of its thousand everyday thoughts. I had to meditate daily for 3 months before I was able to reach a deeper awareness. It is important to be patient and to try not to get frustrated as you practice. Success at meditation does not happen overnight. You do not sit in the lotus position in order to meditate. You can meditate while lying down, while sitting in the chair, or even while walking. The goal is to stop thinking, to observe and detach, to become mindful and aware. As you teach yourself to meditate, you may find it helpful to try visualization and hypnosis as well. In both of these techniques, you are listening to a facilitator's voice, which may help you to focus your concentration. Whether meditating, visualizing, or under hypnosis, you never give up control to someone else. No forces take over your mind or body. You do not enter a time machine. You are merely concentrating very deeply, and there is no danger whatsoever. In these states, you can be inspired. You can touch higher level of awareness. You can be reawakened to your divine nature. These are pathways to enlightenment. Here is the essence of meditation. Every step you take is sacred. Every breath you breathe is holy. If you understand and practice these percepts, you will be mindful and your consciousness will shift from the everyday to the other perspective. You will become observant, detached, and free from judgment. I had been teaching a patient of mine, a business executive, how to meditate. At the beginning of one session, she remarked, I just saw the most beautiful tree. Where did you see the tree? I asked. In front of my house, she replied. It had always been there. When we learn to quiet our minds, we see the most beautiful things. In my workshop, I teach a simple meditation technique that requires only 2 minutes. During the first minute, I instruct the group members to close their eyes and to take a few deep breaths and relax. For the next 45 seconds, they are told to keep their mind completely quiet, to try not to think. Of course, this is very difficult for most people. Our mind abhor emptiness, thus we fill them with ordinary thoughts such as my back hurts, I hear that person coughing, I never should have eaten that breakfast. These are not cosmic inspirations. We do not need these thoughts when we want our minds to be quiet, detached, and observing. During the second minute, the group is instructed to imagine themselves sitting at the bottom of a beautiful pond. They can breathe perfectly normal. Every time you have a thought, I tell them, put the thought in a bubble, watch the bubble float up to the surface of the pond and disappear. Then bring your mind back to quiet. If you have another thought, put it in another bubble and let that bubble float up and disappear. Keep repeating this process. For people who are afraid of water, I tell them to imagine themselves sitting in a beautiful field and use a buoyant helium balloon instead of a bubble. For the next minute, they are using those bubbles and balloons. They have begun to meditate. This is called a bubble meditation. But you can use a word instead, focusing your mind on that word. If your mind wanders gently and without judgment, bring your attention back to the word. The word you choose can be a neutral word like the number 1, or it can be a Sanskrit word which is called a mantra, or it can be an emotionally loaded word like the word love. Observe what feeling that evokes. You can use a visual object instead, such a candle or a flower. Or you can use an ancient technique of focusing on your breath, counting each inhalation and exhalation. Try the bubble meditation. You will be surprised by the benefits. Group exercises. I frequently do an exercise called faces in my workshops. In a fairly dark room with only enough light to prevent total darkness, I have people sitting in pairs. I lead them to a very relaxed meditative state and then they gaze gently into the face and features of their partner. This goes on for 5 to 10 minutes. Features appear to change. People see age, race, and sex shifts. Sometimes animals or other metaphors are seen. People doing this exercise often receive psychic or intuitive information about the other person. Amazing things happen. The results are much more than perceptual distortion. Real information is received. See what happens when you try this. In Boston, I led a large group of workshop participants in the faces exercise. A woman from Boston and a woman from Milwaukee were partners. They had never met before that moment, seemingly randomly partnered from an audience of 700. They were sitting near the front, so I could see their faces as my eyes grew accustomed to semi darkness. A few tears were running from the eyes of the Boston woman. After the exercise was over, and after the small group of two or three had ample time to process the experience and to share their observation and feelings, I asked the woman if she would tell us what she had experienced during the exercise. She agreed. My tears were tears of joy. I saw the face of my brother, and it has been a long time since I have seen him. Her brother had been a soldier in World War II, and he had been killed in France when he was 19 and a half years old. Her partner then took the microphone. Yesterday, during the large group regression, when you took us all to our past lives, I had the experience of being a male soldier, 19 and a half years old, killed in France in World War II. She then provided details of that death, and she began to describe her partner's brother accurately. Many people got goosebumps at that moment. Afterwards, I learned that the woman from Milwaukee was born on the same day that soldier was killed in France. There are no coincidences. During a faces exercise I was conducting in New York, an older woman from India began weeping with happiness. She had just seen the face of a female Buddha in his partner, a young woman from New England whom he had never met until they had become partners 10 minutes later. Female Buddhas are extremely rare, he explained. Then his partner told us that for several years she had been a member of a small Buddhist sect that venerated a female Buddha. These meaningful coincidences can help reorient us along our life paths, a path we have chosen even before we were born. I'm not sure why my workshops in Puerto Rico have always been so magical and filled with mystical experiences. Perhaps the enthusiasm, the open mindfulness, and the spirituality of the participants are responsible. In a packed auditorium at the Condado Plaza Hotel in San Juan in March 1998, miracles were before the 2-day workshop had begun, and unbeknownst to me, a middle aged woman who always wore a beautiful butterfly pendant on a thin golden chain around her neck had prayed to her son, who had died several months earlier. Give me a sign, a message, the grieving mother had asked. I'll know it is you if you give me the sign of the butterfly. Just before we began the faces exercise, I had told the audience some touching stories about butterflies as metaphors for the spirits, as symbols so frequently drawn by children who are dying or who know they are going to die, such as the numerous drawings of butterflies by children who died in concentration camp of the Holocaust, and of actual butterflies hovering over people at funerals. I had not been planning to tell these stories. The thought of talking about butterflies had popped suddenly into my consciousness, and so I had begun to talk about butterflies. The grieving mother smiled broadly. Her son had gotten the message to her, but the best was yet to come. In the darkened room, we began the faces exercise. I had instructed the group to choose as partners people they had never met before. The grieving mother's partner, another middle aged woman who did not believe she possessed any psychic abilities, became aware of the spirit of a young man standing behind his mother. She described the young man to the mother and told her specific details about his life, his personality, and his relationships. His mother was shocked, excited, and ecstatic. Everything she said is perfectly accurate. She described him exactly, the mother exclaimed. Her face was now radiant, and I could actually see her breathing change and her shoulders lighten as the huge weight of her grief was gently lifted from her back. As I taught the group this and other methods of opening avenues to their own psychic and intuitive abilities, many more amazing experiences were occurring all over the room. People in a small group on one side of the auditorium began tapping into and sharing the experience of a distant group on the other side of the room. Incredible coincidences and synchronous events were occurring simultaneously among several groups in separate areas of the room. People with no previously recognized mastery of psychic processes were accurately describing the medical histories of complete strangers. People who had never met before that moment knew so much more about each other than could be possible in their usual state of consciousness. As I watched these incredible interactions, I silently marveled at how our minds are so much more powerful, sensitive, and aware than we think or know. We are amazing. Psychics and mediums and gurus can be important to us, but only for a while. They can help us to see and to understand that there is so much more to our lives that we are usually aware of. As I witnessed once again in Puerto Rico, we were all psychics, mediums, and gurus. As we learn, we open up and strengthen our own intuitive abilities and we gain wisdom. This brings me to the end of today's reading. We'll tune in again tomorrow at around 7 p.m. to continue the chapter 14 and we'll start reading psychometry. Till that time, this is Vibhanashin signing off. Take care. Good night.